Hey, accounting scholars, welcome back to chapter 6. Hey, we're going to really rock and roll the rest of the semester, and you're in great shape to do that because much of what we are going to be talking about is specifically related to the business planning project that you worked on the first 2 or 3 weeks of this semester. This particular chapter is called Planning the Balanced Scorecard Approach and Budgeting. It's literally all about budgeting, and the budgeting activity really takes into consideration a company's knowledge and thoughts about their estimated selling prices. You actually went through that in your business plan as you decided what selling price to set for your various products, your inventory philosophy, how much inventory you're going to have available for production, as well as the employee compensation. And some of you have came up with some really cool ideas relating to employee incentive compensation for the employees in your business plan. In chapters 4 and 5, we really set the stage for this particular chapter because chapter 6 is all about how you plan on an ongoing basis for each of the various business processes. And remember our terms we associated with that are revenue, conversion, and expenditure process. And as opposed to the business planning process, where we went through a one-time activity to basically describe a business, the budgeting process is typically an annual activity. So let's get started here. So let's talk about what the benefits of budgeting are. And there's really 4. The first is planning. The second is communication and coordination. The third is resource allocation. And the fourth is evaluation and control. But let's take one of these at a time. So planning is the essentially the process of budgeting on an annual basis. You actually present plans, and they typically are quantified in financial terms. The second benefit is communication and coordination. The whole budgeting process, the whole development of an annual plan, promotes communication between departments and coordination of departments. So it's kind of like the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. The sales department knows what the production department is doing, and vice versa. The third is resource allocation. Basically budgets are a formal process that companies go through each year to determine what the best uses of their resources are. Where should they invest their money? Where should they invest their employees' time? So it helps companies determine where their scarce resources should be used. Scarce resources is certainly a term you've heard in your AP accounting classes. This is the formal process that companies go through to literally allocate scarce resources. And last but not least, it's a check. It's a way to evaluate and control how you're doing. Budgets are benchmarks. They measure each month and on a year-to-date basis actual performance versus a documented plan, which is the budget. All right, let's talk about the costs of budgeting. Now, budgeting is an activity just like any other activity which in a business, which requires time, which is obviously a resource. You've heard me say several times in the classroom, time is money, and money is time. Uh, and also, uh, there's typically resources involved. So the budgeting process can be time consuming, and therefore it can eat up resources. I mean, I can remember when I worked for some very large companies, uh, we would literally spend 3 months, the last 3 months of a year, preparing next year's annual budget. Okay, let's talk about adaptability. This is a major factor, and really good companies uh, follow a process called flex budgeting, which basically says, hey, the budgeting is a guide. It's not necessarily something that is chipped in stone and never changes. So adaptability basically says if the budget is too strict, uh, companies may be unable to respond to changes in their marketplace, their competitive environment, and therefore the flex budgeting approach is the best approach. Okay, the third area is motivation and behavior. Uh, Budgets really influence how a company operates, and for two good reasons. Budgets are mechanisms for top management to measure how people are doing, how the sales department is doing, how the production department is doing, how the marketing department is doing. But it's also the budget also sometimes ties to people's compensation. By compensation, again, meaning how people are paid. Uh, and so, if a sales department, for instance, doesn't meet their revenue goals, they're not going to make the employees in the sales department, the management in the sales department aren't going to make as much money. So people's behavior is definitely affected if they know they're going to be held accountable for achieving the budget projections. Okay, so there's a couple different approaches here, but let's talk about two. So, what is the difference between the mandated versus the participatory budgeting? Okay, mandated budgeting is kind of a militaristic approach to budgeting. Um, it's basically command and control. The generals at the top, set the battle plan, and they basically tell their subordinates, okay, this is what you're going to do. Don't ask any questions. Just do it. Uh, that's called top-down budgeting. The budget is prepared by the upper management of a company, and it's basically handed to the organization. And it's a don't ask any questions. Just do what I'm telling you to do. These are your goals. Now, on the other hand, a participatory budget is what is called bottom-up budgeting as opposed to top-down. And in this particular budgeting philosophy, the budget's prepared by the lower levels of management and the employees, and it's literally passed up to top management. Now, the Japanese, in the 80s and 90s, really made this type of approach very popular among managements around the world. Uh, the reason was they basically said, the employee on the assembly line should be contributing to this whole process. And what evolved from this were things called quality circles and things of this nature. And as a result, for a long time until other companies and other countries adapted this, Japanese companies were pretty much the icons of best practices in management. Now, with two diametrically opposed approaches, mandated versus participatory, probably the best approach is somewhere in the middle. Uh, because the advantage of the mandated approach is it basically avoids what is called budgetary slacking. Uh, where people, if you do it from the bottom up, may give themselves relatively easy goals. Uh, on the other hand, the benefit of following a participatory approach, it typically increases motivation if uh, if uh, if people feel they're part of the process. So it really needs to be a combination of both to make the the budgetary process work. Okay, one last question, guys, which are two terms that you will very frequently hear. Certainly in this chapter, you'll hear this in your college level accounting classes, and you will certainly hear it if you go on to large companies after graduation. And that is called incremental and zero-based budgeting. Incremental budgeting basically says, hey, the way we're going to approach the budgeting process is we're going to look at the prior year's budget and results, and that's going to be our starting point, and we're going to incrementally change those particular inputs and use that as a basis for our budgeting in the coming year, in the planning for our coming year. On the other hand, a zero-based approach basically says, hey, we're going to ignore what's happened in the past. We don't really care what the budget was last year, what the actual results were. We're going to assume that each budget period starts with zero. And we're going to approach each budget item as a justification process. So we can allocate scarce resources most effectively based on our current environment. The reality is both approaches, incremental and zero-based, are valid. Incremental is certainly easier to implement if you just basically follow the last budget made the prior year, or what the actual results have been. On the other hand, zero-based has its advantages and disadvantages. It's certainly more difficult to do, but it forces the company and management to consider each and every incremental budget item and determine whether it really is necessary. All right, guys. So we'll end it there. Looking forward to seeing you in class tomorrow and working on some problems related to these slides. Take care.